to the Over Under Movies podcast, where we take a prominent figure or franchise in the world of filmmaking and ask the simple question: are they overrated or are they underrated? My name is DeAngelis. I am joined as always by my co-host, Mr. Jason Gong.
Hello.
And we have another guest on the podcast today. We're very excited to welcome to the show Mr. John McDyer. John, welcome to the podcast.
Hello there.
Today we are talking about Ridley Scott's Best Picture winning film, Gladiator, from the year 2000. Before we get into the meat of the podcast here, I just want to remind everyone listening that this podcast exists as both an audio format and a video podcast. So while yes, you can listen to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your pods, you can also see our smiling faces here on YouTube, where we record our entire podcast and blast them out for you guys to see us. Pay no attention to me sweating like crazy, all right? It's very hot today for some reason in October, and I was watching Cops. So definitely give us a like, comment, all that good stuff. Now, getting into the meat of this guy, Jason, we are talking about Gladiator, directed by Ridley Scott. Ridley Scott has a new movie coming out soon called Napoleon.
That's right.
Another like biopic style movie. We rewatched Gladiator earlier this week. What'd you think of it?
I thought it was a great little film. Felt pretty epic in scope. It was fun to watch. It was violent. It was funny at times. Just a very big type of movie that did a lot. It felt a little bit like a condensed season of Game of Thrones almost, which was kind of cool. And I just enjoyed it overall. What do you think?
Yeah, it's definitely a movie that holds up pretty well to, this movie came out 23 years ago. I know, people our age, we think the year 2000 was like 5 years ago.
Yeah.
But this movie came out a while ago, and I think it does hold up pretty well. This movie was lauded for its visual effects and its cinematography. It's a movie that looks like it came out recently. There's nothing that looks overly dated about it. I mean, the performances are amazing. I think this movie, by and large, is carried by those performances. I think the story is kind of simplistic, possibly intentionally. But yeah, I thought it was good. I didn't think it was amazing, but I think that kind of comes with the territory of these swords and sandals movies.
Yeah.
That there's a bit of a limit on how interesting you can make things without it going too completely over the top. John, you are our resident ancient Rome expert.
History buff.
When I ask you how often do you think of ancient Rome, the answer is all day, every day.
Yeah.
So what did you think of Gladiator?
No, I liked it a lot. It's fun. It's fun as a movie. It's fun as a historical drama. It's historical fanfic, which I'm fine with if it's done well. And if you want to look at a historical perspective, it's clearly doing a long European and especially American tradition of just applying, U.S. sensibilities, to Rome, because we take the American. We don't want the American, regalia takes a lot from Rome.
So let's talk about the plot a little bit of the movie for people that maybe haven't seen this. Gladiator tells the story of Maximus Meridius. He is a Spanish general in the Roman army. He starts the movie as a general, then he becomes a slave, gets slave traded into becoming a gladiator, rises through the ranks of being a gladiator, and has this clash against the emperor Commodus, who is played by Joaquin Phoenix in one of his early breakout roles as an actor. I would say Maximus is played by Russell Crowe. Commodus's sister is Lucilla, played by Connie Nielsenm, who I think is maybe the best part of this movie. I think she's incredible. Some other standouts are Richard Harris, the OG Dumbledore. He plays Marcus Aurelius, who, spoilers, dies 15 minutes into this movie and kind of sets up the power vacuum that the rest of the movie, is about. And then Jamin Hansu plays Juba, a slave from Numidia, and he's kind of a sidekick to Maximus throughout the movie. Some really great performances. Jason, what did you think of the overall plot? Do you think that it flowed well? It's a bit of a long movie. I think it's 2 hours, 40 minutes, something like that.
Yeah, I think for the most part it flows very well. It's a simple revenge story. So first it sets up this guy. He has a very small rise and then an immediate fall. And it's sad, and you're angry for him, and then you spend the rest of the movie rooting for him to seek out his vengeance against the emperor. So the emperor basically kills this guy's wife and son, ruins his life, and then Maximus has to work his way from the very bottom back up to the top so that he can kill Joaquin Phoenix.
Yeah, it's basically just a revenge movie at the center of it. And I think that's kind of what makes it work, is that even if you don't understand all of like the inner workings of like what's happening in ancient Rome at this time, you can understand the motivations of the protagonist and him trying to reach his end goal. I mean, John, what did you think of like the depiction of ancient Rome in this movie? I know you said that it's like fan fiction, but you think it's like, does it feel like relatively accurate enough as like someone who, I know you watch like, you know, documentaries on this kind of stuff?
There are elements, yeah. A lot of it is good. The Gladiator is probably, I mean, the Maximus Commodus is totally, false, basically.
Yeah, Maximus is not a real person, right? He's a made-up character.
It has a lot of the true elements to it, I guess, that it's a very cosmopolitan, large empire spanning things, and that emperors did go crazy with power. Yeah, the I'd say the main historical thing that you could contest with it is the most obvious is the gladiators. Gladiators didn't fight to the death, typically. If you look up some basic Googling tells me the statistics Smithsonian Magazine came up with was about 1 in 9 gladiators would be killed.
So what was actually happening in these gladiator fights then, if there wasn't a fight to the death?
Yeah, you'd have a fight. One person would yield. Usually, they were kind of overfed. They were well fed. They were large, so there would be kind of blood cuts. The crowds wanted to see some blood, but they wouldn't. They wouldn't typically finish someone off. One reason that you can, big motivation for this is just the gladiators extremely expensive. When they have them just like take them to the pits and then, they just throw them in, they might do that for like convicted criminals, just have them, thrown in or something. But typically it would involve years of training to become a gladiator before you're let in. So it's a huge investment.
So the movie kind of like speed runs through all of that, because he gets thrown into like a small arena at the like early in the movie.
Yeah.
And then like immediately they're like, oh, this guy can fight. Let's move him up the ranks a little bit here, and then we see him working up as like one of the main gladiators. They call him the Spaniard. He's kind of like undercover for a lot of this movie before he reveals himself as Maximus. Jason, what did you think of the action sequences, in these gladiator fights? Obviously, like action is something that you can pick apart in a lot of movies, but for me, like I have the argument that this movie is overrated, and that's one of the first things that stood out to me was like, for a movie that's like all about these gladiator fights, I thought the editing was a little choppy.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you there. Like, there were a lot of cuts in pretty much all of the Colosseum sequences, but like the battle scene early on, so the movie opens with a battle between Rome and Germania, and I thought that sequence was very impressive. It was quite spectacular.
Yeah, it's weird that that's like the only big battle in the movie, basically.
I guess, I mean, but it's not about like Rome conquering other places. It's just about a gladiator.
Yeah.
It makes sense. But yeah, I think you're right. Once we get to the amphitheaters, the action gets a lot choppier. But that said, like the stuff that we do see, the stuff that they put on screen in front of us is all cool. You see guys getting chopped in half and it looks cool. People riding chariots and slicing each other. And then there's tigers at one point. There's just real tigers that
They look like real tigers. I don't know if they were CGI tigers. I didn't end up looking it up, but it's possible that they're real tigers for most of those
Pretty
shots.
sure it's real tigers. I also didn't look it up. I just choose to believe that. I mean, they look too good for the year 2000 to be fake tigers. So Russell Crowe fights some tigers. Like, you can complain about the editing, but you're going to have to cut around some stuff if you're fighting real live tigers.
Well, listen, on the topic of the tigers, I think we're burying the lead a little bit here on the main star of this movie, which is all of the movie animals.
So many.
This movie has a ton of different types of animals.
They have several animal bits too.
I mean, not only do we have a ton of horses at the beginning of the movie, I mean, we go into camels, we have movie snakes, we have the tigers. What else am I missing?
You can't forget the giraffes, which won't mate.
We have the gay giraffes.
Yeah.
This movie is way ahead of its time as its first progressive movie, the 2000s.
I don't think it was a very progressive take on the gay giraffes. They seemed pretty angry at the gay giraffes.
They don't seem accepting of their lifestyles whatsoever.
I mean, I'm guessing that's just like a thing from like ancient times that like they were just like trading crap all the time, right? You're like, hey, I got this animal.
Oh,
you want to see this cool animal I got?
Yeah.
No, yeah. I mean, peacocks, were known from in the ancient world for a long time, in like the Greece and Italy for a long time, and those come, from all the way from India, and yeah, like lions, etc. That's famous for the gladiatorial pits. Mm-hmm. Trading exotic animals was probably expensive and niche, but that would have been something people would have done because they were so kind of like an exotic, rich or item.
Yeah. So I hadn't seen this movie in a while. So another thing that really stood out to me, and maybe John, you can lend some more knowledge on this, is that there's a lot of like politics in this movie. Also, the movie kind of can't just go straight through with the Maximus storyline. The movie is cut up with this idea of Commodus wants to basically rule, Rome by himself or with his sister. However, he's like constantly battling against the Senate. And this, I mean, listen, I'm just going to say it. It feels very Star Wars-y. It feels a lot. I'm guessing Star Wars is like roughly based on this idea of like an emperor trying to like battle against like a Senate that's like meant to, be the voice of the people.
The thing is that by the time of Marcus Aurelius, the Senate was already pretty sidelined. They were like a powerful class, but their formal legal powers were pretty limited. Although I believe the story of Commodus is kind of that he was so, wild and untamed. It is a true fact that Commodus fought in the Colosseum.
Oh, really?
He put himself in the gladiatorial fights. Now, not surprisingly, all the gladiators somehow, let themselves be beat by him. But
he was the Vladimir Putin of gladiatorial fights.
But he was, and it's also hard to know because we receive these histories are written down by people usually after the emperor's dead, and if they didn't like them, they're going to let you know. So it's kind of hard to tell what's propaganda after the fact and what's true. But he was very the depiction of him is this very kind of detestable, violent, unpopular figure, and basically the Senate, if I recall, the Senate and members of the Senate and the Praetorian Guard basically set it up for him to be assassinated.
Huh.
And he dies a few years into office by assassination.
Yeah. So the main senator that he's like butting heads with is named Gracchus, I believe it's pronounced. He's played by Derek Jacobi. He is one of the actors that's coming back for the sequel that's coming out next year. We can talk about the sequel in a little bit here. But Jason, what did you think of like all the politics stuff? Because I know like this movie came out 1 year after The Phantom Menace. And those Star Wars prequels, one of the main long-lasting criticisms is like, nobody cares about this politics stuff. We just want the action.
Yeah. What was the name of the other senator? Falco? Yeah, Senator Falco. I would say that
ain't Falco.
Falco is like the Jar Jar Binks of this universe. He's the one who really just betrays the Senate's power to the Emperor. That's my takeaway.
So this movie is roughly based on a book, which I was not aware of. The book is called Those About to Die. It was formerly called The Way of the Gladiator by Daniel P. Mannix. It was written in 1958. Somehow this movie, though, was nominated for Best Original Screenplay. So I guess it was like a very loose interpretation of that book.
I guess they decided at the end. I don't think it's like, it doesn't have the based on like title screen.
Looking at this guy's Wikipedia page, he also wrote a book in 1967 that was later turned into a Disney film. Do you want to take a guess of what that book was?
What's the guy's name again?
His name was Daniel P. Maddox.
Was it a cartoon Disney film?
It was a cartoon Disney film. It's not Hercules. It's not like you wouldn't like guess in like the same realm.
Is it The Black Cauldron?
No. You got any guesses, John?
What's the Jungle Book?
No.
Give us another hint.
The title is two characters.
The Lady and the Tramp.
No, that's a good guess.
The Fox and the Hound?
It is The Fox and the Hound.
Okay.
Two very different books that this guy wrote that were later turned into film adaptations. I think we're kind of like bearing the lead a little bit here on the acting performances. I think that's like the standout. I think that's what makes this movie not just like a regular old like movie about ancient Rome. I think that without these performances elevating things, it's very possible that this movie is like entirely forgettable all these years later. Russell Crowe as Maximus is really good. He was not their first choice, as we learn every time we do one of these movies. He's not the studio's first choice. Ridley Scott wanted to get Antonio Banderas. They also reached out to Mel Gibson, which makes sense. Australian actor, coming up around the same time.
Yeah.
He had just Braveheart was 5 years ago. Mel Gibson was like all the rage. And they also reached out to Tom Cruise. It was funny enough, which year 2000 is the same year Mission Impossible 2 came out. So what did you think of Russell Crowe, though, Jason? Pretty good, right?
Yeah, he was solid. I mean, this was kind of a star-making role for him, and probably the role he's most known for today.
Yeah, I was looking back at his filmography. It's like, yeah, he's the Gladiator guy.
Yeah, he's like, I mean, he's in other like highly...
The Beautiful Mind.
Yeah, things like that he's pretty famous for, but this is like, when you think of Russell Crowe's big role, you see him in the armor, you see him shouting, "Are you not entertained?" Like he steps up and definitely elevates the material that he's given. Yeah, I think you're right. Like all the main characters are just really, really good actors in this movie.
Yeah, Joaquin Phoenix is acting his ass off in this movie. I mean, he's no stranger to playing crazy people in movies. He's just going for it every scene. Like he's like, I want you to fucking hate me, and he just nails that. Like I mean, John, like how good is he at playing like a Roman emperor who's like a giant asshole and doesn't listen to anybody?
Yeah, he's good. He's good in his role. I mean, I can't say, but one thing I'll say is a difference between the movie and history is that, again, Commodus was more of a brute. He wasn't like, trying to bang his sister.
Yeah, we'll talk about the incest in a second. That is true that like when they get to the final fight scene of the movie, spoilers for anybody who hasn't seen Gladiator, Maximus kills Commodus in the final fight. It feels unfair. Like he has to wound Maximus because from the writing perspective, like there's no way you're going to believe that Commodus is going to beat Maximus in a 1v1. Joaquin Phoenix isn't a small guy by any means, but you're like, Commodus ain't taking him into a fight. I mean, they do set it up a little bit in one of the early scenes in the movie where Maximus is walking up to Commodus and he's like shirtless, like sword fighting like 6 dudes at once. But you never believe, because you just watch like, it's like a John Wick movie. Like you watch Maximus like murder all of these people throughout this movie. And then you get to the end and you're like, of course he's going to kill Commodus.
And they've already given you that Commodus is a coward, and that you can tell that in the beginning he's clearly dodging out on the battle.
Yeah, he shows up like basically after the battle is concluded at the very beginning.
And they mentioned that he does this all the time. So they started off with that's like the first one of the first things they tell you about Commodus.
Commodus is your buddy. Where like if the party starts at 8, he's showing up at 11:30. what are you guys all leaving for? Probably my favorite performance in the movie is Connie Nielsenm as Lucilla. I think she's kind of like the glue that holds the whole movie together in a sense. She is Maximus's former lover. It doesn't make it like entirely clear that that's the case in the movie, but like they used to be together. They're not together anymore at the beginning of the movie. Maximus has a wife and son. She is widowed and she has a son named Lucius. And like they kind of like rekindle the relationship throughout the movie. Like she's kind of like a voice of reason a little bit for Commodus, despite the fact that she's kind of like held hostage by him. Also, you can tell that she's afraid of him. What did you think about the brother-sister relationship, especially now that we're in like a post Game of Thrones world where like we've like seen this kind of thing now?
So yeah, I think they have a good progression from, like she still, I think, somewhat cares about him in the beginning until, by the end she's totally hates him and is they kind of show that. And yeah, I'd also mention that Caligula was the one who was suggested to have done something with his sister. So they're kind of, in a very historical fanfic way, they're mushing on different things to their
yeah, they're like grabbing from like different stories, and like pulling them together. So Jason, let's talk about the incest.
Sure. Yeah.
You were upset that there wasn't more incest.
I mean, like you said, we live in a post Game of Thrones world. And I mean, I remembered there being an incest subplot in this film. And then when I watched it, I was like, whoa, this is like nothing. After watching Game of Thrones, I was expecting way more.
We're just like desensitized to it.
We're so desensitized to incest these days. I guess it's for the best, after sitting with this for a few days. It's probably good. I don't think the world was ready in the year 2000 to have Game of Thrones level incest. I think they did just enough to make the audience uncomfortable without pushing too far, which was probably good. And it does make the Emperor feel like a more despicable character. The fact that he's putting his sister through this and acting like a creep on her. So it was an interesting little subplot.
So John, maybe you could tell me, because I know it's a thing with like other royal families throughout history that they're very like incestuous and they want to like keep things in the bloodlines. Like, was that a thing in ancient Rome?
Not brother and sister. Again, Caligula is the one that we have the main account of, and he was also all the accounts of him are very bad, which means that they could be propagandized and played up. The main civilization that I think of, ancient civilization that had half brother sister or full brother and sister marriages, were the Egyptian pharaohs would typically do that, but it wasn't super common in Rome for like brother and sister. I don't know about kind of distant cousins. Obviously, you get that in European royalty pretty famously, especially the Habsburgs.
Yeah, that was just like my first thought was like, I don't know if this is like a thing. Like, is this a normal thing in Rome, or is this like
no?
So this is like a one-off. Like, this guy's being a particularly like weirdo.
Yeah.
In this context.
Yeah, he's definitely breaking. Even historically, he would have been breaking the norms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this movie is directed by Ridley Scott, who has been directing forever. This is like by far his most like critically successful film. This movie was nominated for 12 Oscars. It won 5 of them. Do you think this is Ridley Scott's best movie? I'll let you think about that for a second. I'll list off some of his other titles.
Yeah, good.
He directed Alien.
Yeah, that's probably better.
He directed Blade Runner. He's only won Best Director once, and that was for Thelma and Louise. He directed Black Hawk Down, and then some of his more recent films are American Gangster, The Martian, and The Last Duel, which came out a few years ago.
I'd be stuck between Alien and Gladiator. I think that those stand above. Alien, probably to me, like a more creative launch. I don't know. Gladiator gets points, I guess, in the fact that it's managing to revive a dead kind of
genre.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with John there. I think Alien is such a creative film, and it's one of the few like horror films that is considered to be like really critically praised. It's kind of transcended that genre. It's really hard for horror films to be considered like really, really good. So Alien is probably my favorite of his, and then Blade Runner is also up there. Like, just all of the design in that and everything, and how he crafts a whole futuristic world. It looks amazing, and it's even older than this movie. So those two, I think, are a little bit better than Gladiator, but I still think Gladiator's great.
I will give a shout out to Ridley Scott that, like, looking through his filmography, like, this is a guy that's like kind of done everything. The Martian's really good for anybody who hasn't seen The Martian. I really like that movie.
With Jack Black?
No, not Jack. What movie are you thinking?
What movie are you?
Never mind.
The Martian.
Like, do you mean the Matt Damon Martian?
Yes.
Okay.
The Martian with Matt Damon being stranded on Mars. It's a fun movie. It takes itself a little seriously, but I think that gives it some charm. John, you mentioned that this movie kind of like revitalized the swords and sandals like genre of movies. This is the style of film that was really popular in like the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. But like it just died off for a long time. Is this the best movie that's set in ancient Rome?
Movie, probably.
So here's some others. We have Spartacus in 1960. We have Ben-Hur, of course, in 1959. We have Julius Caesar in 1953. Cleopatra in 1963. We also have Passion of the Christ. We have Last Temptation of Christ. We have Monty Python's The Life of Brian, and of course we have Gladiator.
Yeah, I mean, I would kind of think that the Christian ones are not going to be focused on. I mean, that's a very small slice of Rome. I would, put Gladiator above those. Spartacus is good for of the earlier ones. I've only seen Spartacus, and that's good considering it's Kubrick back back in time, and it's kind of lower level film, but it's good, but it's definitely it doesn't pop like Gladiator does. They do have him be it is about a gladiator in Spartacus, but I'd say that Russell Crowe's is definitely much better entertainment.
Have you seen any of those movies I just listed, Jason?
I saw half of Life of Brian. Pretty funny.
So you may have noticed a bit of a trend in these movies that I was listing off. A lot of them are really old.
They're old, yeah.
So even though this movie kind of revitalized, they say on like it revitalized the swords and sandals genre. I mean, did it?
No.
Not in film, but you have the HBO series.
Yeah. So here's like some swords and sandals movies that came out since the year 2000 that I was able to find. There's two that came out in 2004, Alexander and Troy. Yeah. And then in 2006 we got 300. Those are the main ones I could find, at least for movies.
And then they did a sequel to 300. So.
That is true. There is a 300 sequel. Apparently, they're doing Those About to Die, the book that this is based off of. They're turning that into a television series on Peacock that is it's in development right now. It is directed by Roland Emmerich, the guy that did Independence Day. So I just thought that was like very interesting that they're kind of trying to bring it back a little bit. I mean, what is it about this style of movie that, like, I don't know, Hollywood is staying away from nowadays? Because I mean, we talked about at the beginning of this podcast that like the Gladiator feels like a movie that they could make today and it would still be successful. Why are they not doing more of this?
I think it's just a really expensive thing to do a historical epic that's so far back that you have to basically reconstruct an entirely different world. It just costs a lot of money, and then to have actors do those performances, like a lot of these actors aren't going to be able to transport themselves and take it as seriously as the actors in this movie did. So I think it's just really challenging, and it's a high risk because audiences don't go to see that. Troy was not successful, and neither was Alexander. 300 was successful mostly because it's like a stupid comic book movie.
What do you think, John?
Yeah, it's not super in vogue, except for, again, I think the TV series, like Rome had a few seasons for film. Yeah, it's also, whenever you're doing something historical, it always feels heavy-handed. It can often feel kind of like heavy-handed, or like, how are you going to get an audience to connect with it?
Yeah, but I feel like there is an audience for this type of stuff, though. I mean, we're coming right off the back of the how often do you think about ancient Rome meme. And it seems like there's an audience of people that watch this type of content. Maybe they're more interested in like the documentary side of things, like the actual historical information, as opposed to like you said, this is more of like a dramatic, interpretation of it.
Yeah, I guess like they could definitely do a good another good one like Gladiator. What if they they could? I think it definitely could be done and have be well received. If, again, as Jason was mentioning, it would probably be capital intensive, and so I guess they're sparing about what they look at. But I guess, yeah, I mean, I love Britannia, which is an Amazon Prime, built Roman historical drama. I mean, I probably would see it if they came out with a big Roman themed blockbuster, just cause. But
yeah, so they are making a sequel to this movie. It's been in development for a long time. I think it's just called Gladiator 2. We could talk a little bit about it. It's supposed to come out next year. The returning actors are Derek Jacobi, who plays Gracchus, the senator. Jamin Hansu is returning, and Connie Nielsenm is returning as Lucilla. Spoilers, I don't think we're going to see Maximus or Commodus in this movie, unless it's like flashbacks or something like that. Paul Mescal is playing Lucius, so he's playing the grown-up version of Lucius. Denzel Washington is in this movie. Pedro Pascal is in this movie. And then Barry Keoghan is playing Emperor Geta, who is the emperor in 211 AD. So this movie takes place like 30 years after Gladiator. What direction do you think they're going to go with this? You think it's going to be like a soft reboot type of thing where they just like tell a similar story, or do you think they go like in a totally different direction with it?
I think it'll be pretty different. I don't think Ridley Scott is interested in just doing like the same thing again. So I don't know what they're gonna do, but I imagine Lucius is gonna be a gladiator. I'm not sure under what circumstances he becomes a gladiator, as he is like the equivalent of royalty, but I think he's gonna fight a lot of people. And I think maybe we'll see like the fall of Rome or something.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking like there is some like reboot suspicions here. I have you could have them like have Lucilla be in like the Marcus Aurelius place, basically. Like you kill her off early in the movie,
Oh yeah.
and then like Lucius is like getting revenge for the murder of his mom. He gets like, he becomes a slave or something, has to work his way up through the gladiator arenas. You could just do like the same movie again if they wanted to.
Yeah.
And like it sounds silly on the surface level. This is how Hollywood works nowadays. They're like, hey, what movie made a lot of money in the early 2000s? Gladiator made $500 million.
Let's just play it back.
Yeah. You know what we need to do? Not take risks. Ridley Scott has made like reboot-ish movies with his other franchise, Alien. People did not like Prometheus. People did not like Alien Covenant. So it's possible that he's been like disillusioned a little bit into thinking like, fuck it. Like, I'm just going to make a bunch of money. It's entirely possible that's the direction they go in with it. I mean, John, do you know of any like ancient Rome stories from this time that they could like dip into?
No, I looked up briefly who Emperor Geta was. I mean, it seems like he fights with his brother a lot. I guess that would be what they would do.
It's more sibling rivalry stuff.
Yeah, I mean, they could have, just a Roman. Rome had lots of civil wars. They could they could do, something like that.
Yeah, it is funny they're bringing the senator back as one of the characters. So I'm guessing they're going to have a very similar like Emperor versus Senate storyline going. Before we get into the overrated versus underrated arguments, first we need to determine how is this movie rated. Jason, we're still going with our 1 out of 10 rating scale, I believe. We can go 1 out of 10 movie tigers for this. Where would you rate this movie out of 10? Again, John, since this is your first time on the pod, we're trying to like get like an objective consensus on like what the movie's rated as to give us an idea of like before we get into overrated
How
or underrated.
we rate it, or like how society?
Yeah, how we think the movie is rated, generally speaking.
Yeah, by society.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would put this at about a 7. I think that it won a bunch of Oscars and stuff. People do like this movie. I don't know anyone who like actively hates Gladiator.
Yeah, this movie was like my dad's favorite movie. I remember growing up, and my dad loved Gladiator.
That's funny. So he's thinks about the Roman Empire type of guy.
Unfortunately, I gotta ask him about it. I haven't asked him about
And
it.
your mom's a K-pop stan?
Yeah,
They fell in love?
Listen,
That's incredible.
Listen, opposites attract. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, so it's very popular. It did well critically. I just think that people don't really talk about this movie that much. Like, the only reason I don't rate it higher is that I don't think people today really consider it to be this like masterpiece. I think they consider it to be more of a movie that's playing on TNT and happens to be on while you're watching TNT type of movie. I don't think it has like, I don't think people consider it to be like A Beautiful Mind, which is more of a, a thinking man's award-winning film. So yeah, I think this kind of has been reinterpreted as a regular action movie for dumb guys, but it's actually a pretty awesome movie.
What do you think, John?
I was thinking 6 or 7. So, yeah, I think that it's still considered good, but it's kind of like, Braveheart, and then it has, people don't think of it as high class.
Okay, yeah, I think we can settle on a 7. It's interesting. I can't believe it was nominated for as many awards as it was. Joaquin Phoenix somehow did not win Best Supporting Actor. The biggest shocker on this entire list, though, is Connie Nielsenm did not get nominated for this movie, which is absurd. Because I think she's the best acting performance in the movie. And I was looking at like the other actresses that were nominated. I was trying to think, I guess she would be like best actress. I'm guessing that's how they would push her.
Probably best supporting.
Well, she didn't get nominated for either. Yeah. So it's like a huge shocker to me.
Bummer.
But yeah, so we're going to land on 7 out of 10. So now let's get into it. Jason, you have the job of arguing that Gladiator is underrated. What's your pitch?
Well, I think that Hollywood rarely makes movies of this scope, so seeing a man's life go through these like go from the rise, fall, rise type of thing, and then watching him change an entire empire just by fighting people. It's pretty awesome, and it's a pretty emotional tale as well. Like you said, all the performances are really good. So, like, Russell Crowe's really bringing it, and then Joaquin Phoenix is really, to me, he was like the star of the movie. He's the one who's doing the really over the top acting that somehow works and really puts a bow on the whole thing for me. So basically, the performances really stand out to me as something that should be critically praised, and I just think it's really good. And I think that, like I said, it's been kind of reinterpreted as a dumb guy's action movie when really there's a lot to think about in the film. It is about the rise and like almost fall of an empire. There's a lot of political moments in the film, so there's a lot to follow, and it's just a good viewing experience.
John, you're sitting on Jason's side of the table. For anybody that's watching this on YouTube, you would know that. Which means you're also on the side that Gladiator's underrated. You're kind of the one that like recommended us do this movie. So why do you think Gladiator's underrated?
Again, it's really well done. You remember it well. And think about one thing I just realized watching it the other day is like, you know, some of the cultural impact it has. I wonder if, you know, when he throws his sword into the stands for the first time, you know, does that affect in the Hunger Games when they have Katniss like shoot into the judges' stand when like they're doing training? I don't know.
It could be.
It's definitely very iconic. Again, everyone knows, you know, Are You Not Entertained? It's weird to think of it as like a pre 9/11 piece because Ridley Scott is really leaning into kind of American ideals on like the Roman Republic. There's one thing that I have to add in is that detail that I love that they do is in the beginning when he's talking about, oh, I have to go back and plow. Like I have to go back to my villa and to the farm. Like that is like a huge kind of Roman Republic virtue. And in the film, you know, the big political goal that they're going after is restoring the Roman Republic, which is not historical at all. They would not have been talking about that in circa 280 Rome. But it does fit well with the American model of like this man who has this idea of service, but who doesn't want power himself. A general going back to his farm right afterwards is from the idea of Cincinnatus, who was made a dictator to fight an enemy in Rome. He defeats them, and then the legend is he immediately goes back to his farm and like, you know, continues his harvest. And that's why we have Cincinnati. Like, you know, it's anyway, they do well. I think they play into those things in a authentic way, which I have.
So I have the job of arguing that this movie is overrated. Listen, I think it's a good movie. However, there's nothing outside like the acting performances. There's nothing that makes this not just like a dumb little action movie that you'd see on TNT on the weekdays. This movie's critical success, in my opinion, is a total overreaction to the 1999 film slate, which was Star Wars: The Phantom Menace, The Matrix, Fight Club, Sixth Sense. 1999 is considered like the greatest year of movies in like recent memory. Like it's just like go on Wikipedia and just look up like the movies that came out in 1999. It was just like banger after banger, like every month. Mm-hmm. And this movie is like kind of like an anti-Dark Knight, where they saw this like big, like exciting action movie that was like really popular at the box office, as opposed to Dark Knight. Like this movie got all the Oscars. It's kind of like it's kind of like Return of the King. Like it's just like this is the type of movie that like the Oscars do not recognize generally, at least to this degree. You know, you'll have like a movie like Avatar that will get like a bunch of like technical nominations, or like Dune. Like Dune got a bunch of technical nominations. But like this movie, it won Best Picture. I was looking at IMDb's list of like all of the Best Picture winners ranked, and this movie's in the bottom third Best Picture winners. Like it's not considered a truly like amazing movie. Like it's not transcendent. This movie has staying power because it's a fun little action movie. It's insane that this movie was a Best Picture winner. The films that it won over were Chocolat, Traffic, the Steven Soderbergh movie that lost other awards to, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and Aaron Brockovich. Those are all those other movies are like more well regarded by like cinema people nowadays than Gladiator. Gladiator is like a movie that like you go in with like your bros. I think Gladiator 2 is going to make a bunch of money in a way that like Blade Runner 2 didn't make any money, because like this is a genre that is exciting to people. Also, I think I find it hilarious that this movie is considered a film that like revitalized the swords and sandals genre when it absolutely did not do that. This movie is a flash in the pan. Like they made this one movie about ancient Rome that was really successful, had amazing performances, and then that shit never happened again. That stuff went on to like Amazon streaming television series. That's where the genre is like, that's where their bread is buttered. This is a film genre that was popular 70 years ago. And listen, all the power to them. I think it's a fun little movie. It's not that amazing. That would be my main argument for Overrated. So now we have our arguments. I guess we can, come to a verdict on this. So this is we're no longer in the argument stage, John. Now we're just like trying to talk this out. You can argue in your heart of hearts, do you think this movie is like overrated or underrated? Where do we fall on this?
I think you have a lot of the points right. I think it is interesting. Even if it didn't revitalize the industry, it's still interesting that they managed to pull it off so well. It's kind of like when Quentin Tarantino does a really good, cowboy style, Western style film. It's like, it's not like, we're going to see a bunch of Westerns again, but it's still impressive that you're able to do it in a different era. I would say, yeah, what I was talking about, the kind of historical and American ideals. I mean, you see that in all kinds of movies, from Braveheart through to 300. I don't know if it's any less kind of cringe the way Ridley Scott smushes it into there. So that's the one element that you could, and they have genuinely, I guess, some interesting character interactions, which I think are pretty mature. But that and how you argue it has like kind of Ridley Scott's sort of liberal American idealism mixed in with it are the two ways that would separate it from just being kind of like a bro sort, action movie.
Yeah, this kind of makes me want to go back and like rewatch Troy and Alexander, since those are like the two like most like comparable like movies in the same era, just to see like, I mean, what are those movies like 5% worse maybe? Like, are those movies going to be significantly worse than Gladiator? Because obviously those movies got like no Oscar recognition.
I'm entertained by what I remember of watching Troy.
Yeah, me too.
It doesn't have, I guess. I mean, it's kind of a standard story, and it doesn't have this kind of redeeming societal fight to it the way Gladiator does. Of just you're just like someone trying to save. I mean, they are fighting over a city, but it doesn't have that same feel to me the way Gladiator does. But it's it's also a fine, sword and sandals movie. I would definitely watch it again. Like it's not anything special, but.
Yeah, like I just feel like you could show this movie to somebody who's like never seen it before or had like never heard of it, and told them like, tell me if this is like a TNT like straight to TV movie, or is this a film that was nominated for 12 Oscars and won 5, including Best Picture? Which of the two do you think it is? And like I think most people would be like, oh, this is just like a fun little like ancient Rome movie. There's nothing like truly transcendent about this film. Like you said, John, it's so unique for like this time period to do a movie of this scale. And I think that's what is like the main standout feature of it, is that it's like it's unique. It's kind of peerless.
Yeah, I don't know the quality of all the TNT straight to streaming movies, but again, I do think a lot of the characters were done fairly well with the acting.
Yeah, like I said, I think that's the main thing that elevates this movie is the acting performances.
Yeah, I think why Hollywood liked it so much at the time is because it was this sort of like return to form. After 1999, when The Matrix came out and Fight Club and things were like new and fun and different, I feel like the Oscars that year, they were like, all right, we need an old school movie to really boost up here. And that became Gladiator. And that's probably why it was so like critically well received at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. But I would definitely say check out Gladiator if you haven't seen it, or if you haven't seen it in a while. I think it's kind of long, but I would say overall we enjoyed like the rewatch.
Watch it with your bros. Eat some wings.
John, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast, talking about some ancient Rome stuff. I know you could talk forever about ancient Rome with us in the pod, so you'll have to come back and we can do Spartacus on your next episode.
Yeah, we will do. Hey, Kubrick. Kubrick has a lot. Got a lot of films.
Oh yeah.
Jason, as always, it's a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, bro.
I'm sorry I was sweaty this podcast. The studio gets a little hot.
It's also 78 degrees in October right now.
For some reason, it's like July weather in October. Are you guys gonna see the Napoleon movie when it comes out?
Yeah, because I have AMC A-list, so I'm gonna catch
I'd see it. I haven't made, but yeah, I would definitely see that.
Yeah, I'm sure Joaquin Phoenix will be good. He'll get nominated for that.
Is this only their second time reuniting, Joaquin Phoenix and?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll have to like look through all of Ridley Scott's stuff. But anyway, that's going to be it for this one, guys. Let us know in the comments, did we get it right? What are some of the topics you'd like to see for future episodes? Make sure to leave a like on this episode and consider supporting the show by checking out our Patreon page. For myself, for Jason, for John, we will catch you guys next week on the Over Under Movies podcast. We'll see you at the movies.